The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome to the Appraisal Institute's webinar on the valuation impacts of COVID-19, 1 to 4 unit residential. My name is Bill Garber, Director of Government and External Relations of the Appraisal Institute. Jeff Sherman, MAI, AIGRS, 2020 President of the Appraisal Institute, and I will moderate our session. Today, we will delve into the impacts of COVID-19 on residential property. We have assembled a stellar lineup of designated members of the Appraisal Institute who will help us dissect valuation impacts and considerations for investors, developers, financiers, and other stakeholders of the property markets. We're focusing our discussion on the top 10 metropolitan statistical areas and a couple of residential specialty practice areas and issues. Joining us today are Dominic Neglia, SRA, Neglia Appraisals, covering New York. Charles Baker, SRA, AIRRS, covering Los Angeles. Chip Wagner, SRA, with AL Wagner Appraisal Group in Chicago. Alan Gardner, MAI, SRA, with Gardner Ray in Dallas. Mark Verrett, SRA, with Acurity Valuation in Houston. Ayako Marsh Miranda, SRA, with A&B Real Estate Group in Washington, D.C. Wendy Friedman, SRA, with Target Appraisal Group in Miami. John Simonera, SRA, with John Simonera and Company in Philadelphia. Dan Fries, SRA, with Daniel Fries and Associates in Atlanta. Mercedes Calkins, SRA, covering Boston. Warren Boisot, SRA, with BLG Appraisal Group, who's covering appraisal flexibility programs. Byron Miller, SRA, AIRRS, with BM Appraisals, covering relocation appraisal. And Michael Tankersley, MAI, SRA, AIGRS, and AIRRS, covering rural appraisal. Our session will run 120 minutes with time for questions at the end. You can submit questions at any time within the questions tab itself. Please consult the helpline if you have any questions. Several documents, including contact information for our speakers, is available in the Documents tab of the GoToMeeting. Now I would like to hand the baton to Appraisal Institute's 2020 President, Jeff Sherman, MAI, AIGRS.
Hey, thank you so much, Bill. I'd like to welcome everybody here to this 2-hour webinar. I hope you find some really meaningful value to this. There will be a lot of good statistical information provided. And I think at the end, try not to get off early if you can help yourself, because there's some really good hints, some new things happening that I think will be of interest to you. But I'd like to kind of go back for just a minute and quote Stephanie Coleman, if I could. And you all know that she's our Director of Screening and monitors our helpline, which is a tremendous member benefit. So if you get stuck on an appraisal issue, please feel free, because you've paid for the service, if you're an AI member, to call Stephanie. So the appraisal report should address the uncertainty in the market caused by the COVID crisis, but not as a limiting condition, extraordinary assumption, or disclaimer, but rather as part of the discussion of market conditions. So you need to highlight key points in your appraisal report. If you have a letter of transmittal, do it there or in one of your appropriate addenda items. And every time mortgage interest rates are changed, the market can also change. So we know that comments on market reactions are standard procedure for all work that we're doing in valuation. Next slide, please. Surveys of market participants are definitely desirable in the absence of statistical or empirical evidence, but be careful about using anecdotal evidence as though it's scientific. And we're seeing this when they talk about issues with the COVID virus itself, and one or two observations don't create evidence, so be careful. MLS systems have preset reports that can be incorporated into reports. Some government agencies also track supply and demand issues, but they're not always up to date. And remember that it is our responsibility to form an educated opinion of the impact, if any, on your subject property's market value from current conditions. And to that end, if you make a zero adjustment, it definitely is an adjustment. It says that there is no impact. So be careful about your process. Next slide, please. And for reference, please note that we have guide notes 10, 11, and 12 that are available to you. And they provide some clues about how to look at difficult market conditions. And I think items that, as a refresher, will be a benefit to you. Next slide, please. And I think we go back to Bill.
Yes, thank you, President Sherman. And we're going to delve right into the market reaction and analysis. Starting first in New York, Dominic Neglia. Dom, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you for having me, Bill. And I would like to welcome everyone to this webinar. It should be very informative and useful for everyone. I'll just jump right in. So there's really insufficient data for a determination of short or long-term effects on the market in New York City. So far, statistics are available only for April and part of May. It's been my experience that trends or changes in market conditions should be measured over at least 3 to 6 months in order to be quantifiable and reliability. So there are no comprehensive statistics to measure how residential values in all 5 boroughs of New York City are being affected by the current crisis. So I examined anecdotal market responses. In Manhattan, the most expensive borough, in April 2020, new home listings hit a record low of 717 units for an 85% decline compared to April of 2019. New Yorkers who really needed to sell cut prices significantly in April and May of this year. By the second week of April, new apartment listings in Manhattan were down 89% compared to the same period in 2019, and signed contracts were down 77% in April of 2020. At the end of April, one major developer was offering 20% discounts on a large new high-end condo development in Manhattan. The number of new apartment leases in Manhattan declined 71% in April 2020 compared to April of last year, and new rental listings fell about 60% in March versus 19. In Brooklyn, which is the most populous borough, closed sales declined by over 37% from March 1st to May 15th of this year compared to the same period of last year. And the Real Estate Board of New York ordered the public days on market clock to not be displayed for residential listings so that listings would not appear stale when activity was permitted to resume. Next slide, please. So I decided to compare 2 prior major disasters with the COVID-19 crisis and how well did New York City residential real estate rebound. Of course, the attacks of September 11, 2001 had a dramatic effect on values throughout New York City, but especially profound in lower Manhattan neighborhoods. Right after 9/11, condo sales dropped precipitously in the 2 zip codes most affected. A year later, average sale prices of residential condos in those 2 zip codes had exceeded the levels of 2001. By the last quarter of 2002, sales volume had quadrupled compared to the last quarter of 2001, and average sale prices had increased by approximately 17%. Citywide, by the end of the first half of 2002, prices for most residential property types had exceeded the levels achieved just before 9/11. So the conclusion is that real estate values in New York City for residential properties rebounded within about a year of the attacks on 9/11. The other major disaster was Superstorm Sandy. Try and say that 3 times when you're impressed with time in a webinar. October 2012. The Rockaways neighborhoods of southern Queens suffered extensive physical devastation as a result of Hurricane Sandy. 6 months after the event, there was a total of only about 65 residential sales in all of those areas from the time Sandy hit. In the next 6 months, or about 1 year after Sandy, sales volume had more than doubled, and average sale prices had increased by about 5% in those same areas. Next slide, please. One source projects the prices in New York City may decrease by 3% in the next 12 months, but we will rebound by the third quarter of 2021. Prior to the crisis, there was a buyer's market in most of New York City, with supply outstripping demand for most products, and this was exacerbated by the crisis, which has created even more pent-up supply. With mortgage rates still at all-time lows and banks hungry to lend money, it suggested that the buyer's market will continue over the near term as the effects of the crisis taper off. It can thus be extrapolated that compared to 9/11 and Sandy, the current crisis will have a stronger effect on local real estate because of its very serious negative effect on almost all aspects of commerce in the city. But New York City obviously has a history of resiliency. Values may decline for a while, and absorption may take a year or more, but supply and demand will eventually return to normal levels. So what are the takeaways? Well, there's wild cards: local employment rates, predictable emotional damage, and painful recovery from the effects of COVID-19. People are scared, leading to fear-motivated migration out of New York City, which is difficult to measure. Obviously, if infection rates increase again, all bets are off. Thank you from New York.
Thank you, Dom, for that great analysis. We're going to head west to Los Angeles. Charles Baker, SRA AIRRS. Charles, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill. And I want to thank President Sherman, Bill Garber, and distinguished panelists. This is really a treat to be here today. You know, there's an old joke that if you gather 3 economists, you'll get 4 opinions. We really are in uncharted territory. What was considered news yesterday may very well be obsolete today, and we've all been tracking the news on a daily basis. It's just hard to keep track. Personally, for me, I specialize in the high-end space. Since March, I've had over $400 million in residential assignments. 6 of those properties constituted $300 million in aggregate valuations. A quick high-end snapshot. We've had 2 closed sales over $50 million since the pandemic began in Southern California. A house that was listed for $82.5 million, sold for $68 million, closing in June. And of course, we had the Jeff Bezos sale for $165 million. But you know, those people really are largely immune from what's been going on in the larger market. So where are we now? As of June, we're seeing a number of cross currents. LA County unemployment rate as of April is 19.6%. It's about the same for May. We are seeing consecutive weekly gains in properties that have entered escrow and properties that have closed, 25% and 19% respectively. And that's suggesting that pending and closed sales should increase in the coming weeks. We are seeing continued signs of buyer demand starting to come back. After declining by 75% from where we started last year, the number of showings booked is only down 0.3% from the same point last year. So we're up 50% on a weekly basis from where we started in 2020, and 13% higher than pre-crisis levels as of late February. Mortgage applications have remained above 2019 levels. We've got fewer buyers and sellers getting cold feet. After peaking at 50% of buyers that withdrew from the market, we're now down to less than 10% of buyers withdrawing from their contracts. Mortgage interest rates are at all-time lows, 3.15%. We're seeing more discounting, but the median price is still holding up. Magnitude of the discounts has been shrinking as of late. It was 3.5 to 4% over the past couple of weeks, compared to 4 to 5% back in early May. The supply response is not matching the uptick in demand, interestingly enough. New supply is just not rebounding yet to the same degree we see with buyer demand. Pending sales were down only slightly last week, and yet the pace of new listings coming onto the market has been essentially flat or down for about 5 weeks. Mortgage applications rebounding 54%, that's nationwide. Purchase applications up, refinance applications are way up. Interesting enough, in California, we've got about 20% of foreign buyer and seller participation. They are facing delays in being able to close. Largely because embassies and consulates are closed or have limited hours in China and elsewhere. Mortgage forbearance requests have slowed considerably. Our California governor has extended the local eviction moratoria through July 28th. We are facing a $54 billion deficit in California, and the governor is calling for some spending cuts. One of the cross currents that we're seeing in the negative direction is a UCLA study that's estimating that potentially 350,000 tenants might be forced out once the rent moratorium ends, due to their inability to file a legally sufficient response to an unlawful detainer complaint within 5 days. Well, of course, landlord groups are disagreeing with that. We also have a study from the California Affordable Housing Providers, and they are claiming that we might be facing a potential $1.7 billion loss over the next year, which constitutes 79% of California's existing affordable subsidized housing. So that's something to watch for. And just anecdotally, I've talked to a couple of rehabbers lately, and they're kind of pausing their acquisitions for now. And they're going to look again at the market in 8 to 10 months to see that they believe that there's going to be an uptick in distressed sales. Briefly moving on to the next slide, California legislative update. Of course, we had the CARES Act passed by Congress March 27th, which placed a temporary moratorium on eviction filings for residential properties backed by federally backed mortgages or those that participate in affordable housing programs like Section 8. Now, there is a proposal by Assemblywoman Monique Limon that would expand the ban to private mortgages. April 6, California Judicial Council adopted an emergency rule that bans nearly all evictions in California. Governor Newsom extended the eviction moratorium through July 28th. Now, rents are not waived, but deferred. There is a proposal being floated in Sacramento that would grant qualifying renters 10 years to repay missed payments directly to the state. So we got relief for borrowers, relief for tenants, and low interest rates, 3 legs to the stool. So right now that stool is pretty level, but those same relief programs are kicking the can down the road. And finally, I'm going to skip to the last slide. If you want to look at those trends, we're still pretty healthy here in Los Angeles. And I want to thank you very much and hand this back to Bill.
Thank you. Off to Chicago we go. Chip Wagner, SRA with Wagner Appraisal Group. Chip, what are you seeing in Chicago? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. COVID-19 obviously became a global pandemic on March 11th, and by March 21st, Illinois mandated stay-at-home order as well as closing all non-essential services. In the days that followed, I began carefully watching the real estate market, reflecting on my experience after the start of the Gulf War, 9/11, the financial crisis in 2008, trying to see how these events impacted real estate throughout my career. Immediately, we started to predict doom and gloom as the stock market plummeted. I heard stories about those living in higher density housing desperately trying to get out of their apartments and condominiums, hoping to get into larger properties. They couldn't deal with living on upper floors and waiting for an elevator that was empty or safe to enter. Furthermore, would anybody even leave their homes to buy real estate? The ShowingTime.com website shows a rolling weekly average of residential real estate appointments throughout the country, and within 2 weeks, Illinois fell nearly 60%. Then the unemployment numbers started coming out, and we had a real problem brewing. Many people were now working out of their homes, still employed, while others were furloughed or even lost their jobs. As we followed these moments in our history almost daily, I began to think a real estate recession might not affect the middle to upper priced housing, but it might impact the modest price housing market where people were losing their jobs. We were hearing words like mortgage forbearance to prevent homes slipping into foreclosure. The Fed was pumping stimulus dollars in the markets, and it was said we were entering a recession. Next slide. 12 weeks have passed since Illinois locked down on March 21st, and as usual, hindsight's always 20/20. I couldn't predict much of what I'm seeing today. First of all, the higher density housing market is stronger than we would have anticipated. The homes closing today are homes that went under contract during the pandemic. The surprises are not measurably lower. Prices so far have stayed pretty solid and selling at or slightly above 2019 prices in most areas. There is still time where prices could drop, but as we seem to have seen the economy begin to stabilize, real estate is still somewhat strong. 2 big reasons are interest rates and the undersupplied market. The fact of the matter is low interest rates combined with the inventory shortage have staved off price declines up to now. There's definitely a lack of inventory in many communities, price brackets, and housing types. The shortage of inventory was a continued problem well before the pandemic began, and when home sellers took their homes off the market, this further compounded the inventory shortage right as we entered our high-demand spring home buying market. New construction somewhat halted in many areas. There's 2 high-rise condominium buildings under construction in Chicago that halted, one in the South Loop and one in River North. The developers have said that they will continue construction soon. In fact, I believe they already have. Construction workers working outside were faring better than those finishing interiors. The city of Chicago has a workforce of about 600,000 professionals, many who commute into the city. Many of these office buildings remain empty 3 months after this pandemic started. Corporate America has learned that much of their workforce may return to work remotely from their homes and may never return to their cubes and office spaces again. One big complication we have is public transportation. The Metro commuter train services the communities surrounding the city of Chicago, and their ridership is down nearly 90%. The CTA train, called the L for those of you familiar with Chicago, is down an estimated 75%. These public transportation options are looking at adding trains and limiting the number of people that are able to ride in the cars. All of this has prompted discussions of rethinking corporate office space. Their employees are ending their leases and selling their homes and condos, and they're considering moving to farms, beaches, and the mountains. Another interesting trend is that there's been a tendency to build smaller homes over the past 2 decades. There is a generation of buyers who had not wanted larger living spaces. There had been a trend back to the city in the past couple of decades as young professionals and empty nesters wanted the culture and excitement of the big city. We are now seeing an emerging trend of buyers looking to escape city life now and moving back into suburbia and beyond for more space and more square footage. This is good news for those with larger homes in the suburbs. COVID-19 has taught us how to work at home with other family members, also in the home. Home office space has become a premium feature in housing as the workforce begins to navigate the future of employment working from home. Will this translate into new construction trends? Possibly, I think so. Look for home office features with technology to become a premium. Many real estate agents I've spoken to in recent weeks said there was a 1 to 2 month lull at the onset of this pandemic without much activity. But by midway, the floodgates seem to have opened, and they attribute the late spring rush to pent-up demand as people still need to buy homes and people still need to sell their homes. Some newer buyers, meaning younger first-time home buyers, want to think there might be a housing bubble, but there's no evidence of that, and there's not a discount on home prices for COVID at this time. Any property in good condition not needing any work is selling fast. Many agents are seeing multiple offers in our area. That being said, properties that are not perfect or have deferred maintenance or lacking specific features or improvements that are not selling or selling at deep discounts. The idea of presenting a contract on a home that they haven't personally walked through does not seem to be a trend that's catching on here. I always point out real estate's local and difficult to make general comments. Final slide, which is on your screen here, because we all love statistics, I'll leave you a couple of stats. Statistically, this region covers about 2/3 of the population in the state of Illinois. The month of May was profiled with year-over-year data as it reflects homes that went under contract that took place after our pandemic began. You can see there's significant declines in sales volume of 30 to almost 50% and slight increases in market time. But it shows nearly stable trends in median and mean sales prices and actually an increase for attached housing in the city of Chicago. As we've discussed already, there's probably going to be a reoccurring trend today, theme today. There's not enough hard data to really determine the short or long-term effects on our market at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chip. Let's go to the Lone Star State, starting with DFW, Alan Gardner, MAI, SRA, with Gardner Ray. Alan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill. We appreciate everyone being here. Again, this is Alan Gardner. I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth market with Gardner Ray. We handle some residential and commercial here in the area. Glad to be here. I'll be honest, the Dallas market, as what everyone's been saying, it has been fairly erratic. Sometimes we see this market literally changing weekly, sometimes daily. Started off very bleak in March and April, and then in May we're just seeing things that really don't make sense with a lot of high demand, higher prices. As far as the first slide there, you'll see that it highlights the list volume. January through March of 2020 starts off very similar to January through March of 2019 is relative to the total dollar volume of listings as well as the number of listings. And then in April and May, we begin to see that listing and volume numbers drop. By June of 2020, we see that the number of listings dropped by 13% relative to 2019. And those June numbers are basically annualized for the entire month. So nothing too unexpected there as buyers and sellers huddled in due to the pandemic. The interesting thing, though, with relative to listings is you'll see those bottom two graphs. You'll see how the sales price to list price ratios really stayed the same if you compare it to 2019 versus 2020, all the way from January through June. You can visually see there that the original list price to sales price, as well as the final list price to sales price ratio, are very similar numbers. This is somewhat of an indicative of buyers' demand. So the buyers we did have there were willing to pay for the properties. Early on in the pandemic, when the fear was highest, I had one listing agent tell me, this was back in March and April, how he was basically, rallying his team because they were still getting a lot of buyer calls. They just didn't have the ability to go show the homes, and also there was some fear among their own agents to go out and do that and show and list those properties. So I think the demand has always been there, even early on when there was a lot of fear that was heightened. If we can move to the next slide, please. The next slide here, we talk a little bit about the sales in the Dallas-Fort Worth market. So while the market sales and volume and median averages, how they reacted. So while the listing numbers and volumes were similar, we see that January 2020 sales were 19% higher relative to January 2019. So 2020 was starting off to be a pretty big year. However, you'll see there how the sales drastically decreased as of May relative to 2019, down 30% as far as the numbers go. We also see that in June, the adjusted total number of sales is also significantly lower from 2020 relative to 2019. That can be seen from those top two slides. The bottom two slides there take a look at what the average and median sales prices for the Dallas-Fort Worth market were. Prices of January 2020, the average median price was much higher in 2020 versus 2019. So we did see some appreciation relative to last year as of January. But you can see there towards the end, we're looking in May and June, those numbers have leveled off, and we have very similar average and median prices from May and June of 2020 to 2019. If we can move to the final slide there, one thing I wanted to show important to point out is even though the last numbers of the DFW market kind of show a erratic but yet overall stable market, if you go to the suburban markets like Frisco, for example, Frisco is a town of close to 200,000 people and was recently named the fastest growing city in the United States. If you look at those numbers, while we start off similar as we would to the overall Dallas-Fort Worth market, I think the important thing to notice is by looking at May, and you'll see there's a huge spike in the average and median prices in May. Now, while some of this may be attributed to the fact that we had some higher dollar sales, anecdotally, a lot of this is attributed to the fact we saw some of the highest contract prices within certain neighborhoods in suburban markets that we've seen, at all. Builders, Highland Homes and MII Homes some agents that reported that they're going to have their biggest months in May and June that they've ever had. So there's a lot of obvious demand out there when we're especially compare that to March and April, when basically if you went to a new construction subdivision, it was bleak and empty. So it is a very mixed market. The statistics really don't tell the full story. You really have to go out and talk to the market participants and see what's going on out there. Last thing I really want to talk about and touch on is the GSE policy changes. I do think this is the way the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac has reacted has been very favorable and helpful for a lot of markets, especially ones that are suffering with the pandemic, maybe a little bit more than what we've seen here. Overall, I do think it's very good. I will say a lot of market participants are not happy with the fact that we don't go see the homes. They want us inside those homes. But that's kind of a brief summary. I appreciate your time, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you so much, Alan. Let's take a trip down I-45 to visit with Mark Verrett, SRA, with Acuity Valuation. Mark, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for everyone for attending. Those familiar with Houston know that we have had an opportunity to show off our resiliency economically over the last a little more than a decade. We responded positively, or at least above average, to the subprime mortgage crisis in terms of home value. In recent years, we have had the Memorial Day floods, the Tax Day floods, and Hurricane Harvey. All have come out of that quite well. And I've heard a theme today of cross currents, and that certainly is the case in Houston. We are dealing with the effects of the pandemic, but also almost an afterthought until the effects of the pandemic may lighten. We've got a dramatic story with oil prices happening, and oil, of course, is very important to the Houston economy, energy in general. Texas was one of the first states to begin a phased reopen. May 1st was that first date. I think it's important to observe the uptick in cases. This was through September 3rd, or I'm sorry, June 3rd. It is notable that since then, I'm seeing stories of significant increases over that as we reopen and given public gatherings and protests and such. And I think that's a good way to be conscious of how things might be playing out the remainder of the year. That COVID is going to be on the minds of everyone here in Houston as we continue reopening. Before April of this year, we were outpacing 2019's record volume. And of course, COVID has slowed that down considerably. Ted Jones, a local economist with Stewart Title, is estimating a sales volume down 35% this quarter, 25% down on the year for our local economy. So interesting to see how that may or may not be playing out here in the months since. So with oil, we have the bottom really following out. I know it made national headlines with negative oil prices on a few days. They've rebounded decently from $53 in June of 2019 to $38 in June of 2020. In that bottoming out of 1278, but there has been a much larger reaction than that decline in crude oil prices in rig counts, which are an important metric that we follow here. Going from 483 in 2019 to just 127. And as you can see from this grid, that drop has happened almost in just a 60-day period. So it is a significant cross current that is hard to tell a story of how single-family housing is, what's affecting single-family housing. COVID certainly is having an impact, but oil is as well. As we head to the next slide, we can look at April sales results. Generally, single-family housing volume is down just under 20%. But surprisingly, home values are staying strong. In April, the median sales price rose just under 2.5%. So generally, less activity, but no desperate sellers. The April rental market, notable that it slowed a bit in April. And as we go to the most current set of data here in May, we see that sales volume again down 20%. For the first time, we saw average sale price decline of 7.5%. But what's notable there is that the median sale price remained virtually stable. And what we've seen is around a 35% drop in median sales price, or I'm sorry, in sales volume for homes less than $100,000, and a 56% drop in luxury home sales. Luxury home sales in this market being defined as values greater than $750,000. So that would explain the drop in median or in average sales price, but not in the median. So it's hard to say this early, but the drop in oil prices is probably having more of an effect on the change in in average sale price there, and the significant limited activity in the luxury home market. New construction sales volume is up 25% from year over year. The prices are down 7%, which may be an indication of a little bit more competitive market from builders selling. It's as many have mentioned so far, leading to me it's too early to have statistical data supporting any major trend differences in desires of buyers. Anecdotally, there is no early sign yet of some exodus from the urban markets in Houston. We do see those that are already in the market are now considering not a short commute, but are considering a live home, live work, play in one setting, a suburban type opportunity. So we do see a lot of active buyers shifting where they might want to be. That will conclude what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Let's head up to my neck of the woods in DC. Ayako Marsh Miranda, SRA, with A&B Real Estate Group. Miranda. Ms. Miranda, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bill, and welcome to all of the webinar participants. Today, I will be discussing the Washington, D.C. market, which prior to COVID-19 was on track to be the strongest spring selling market in years. In April, during COVID-19, properties sold decreased by 25% and listings decreased by 27%. By May, both started returning to pre-COVID-19 levels. Agents are seeing a reduction in listings, with many being postponed into the future. However, properties that are selling with shorter days on market and typically at or above list price. In the DC market, appraisers are seeing an increase in assignments due to record low interest rates, high buyer demand, and limited supply. There are several factors. Next slide, please. There are several factors that are unique to the District of Columbia, and I would like to take a few moments to discuss how these factors, coupled with COVID-19, impact our market. 2020 is an election year, which typically results in a very active residential market that extends into the following year. The federal government is our largest employer, which contributes to a median income of over $85,000 and home ownership rate of 42%. Home to 19 colleges and universities. There is also a large number of second home purchases for student lodging, and there is also a large influx of investors purchasing properties for condo conversions and 2 to 4 family development. We also have an increase in owner-occupied short-term rentals like Airbnb, which rent for about 60% above traditional long-term rentals. Next slide, please. So as market participants, what trends should we be looking for? Are homeowners reclaiming their basement apartments for home offices? Will this also decrease the number of long-term and short-term rentals on our market? Are middle income earners moving outside of DC since they may have less dependency on public transportation due to permanent teleworking? Analysts predict that 20% of college students will not return in the fall. Will this have an impact on our rental market and demand for second home purchases? Will short-term rentals decline as transients and tourists move back to traditional hotel lodging because they're just afraid of COVID-19? Will there be a slowdown of investment purchases for condo conversion and 2 to 4 property development? And are they shifting back to single family? Although we are currently experiencing record low interest rates, will the more stringent loan requirements limit the amount of buyers? And finally, will the election have an impact on the market as in previous years? First of all, we also should be looking, so when we look at the future of residential appraising in the DC, we also should be looking at, is this pandemic going to have an impact, and what are we going to be seeing in the market? There needs to, I think one of the first things we need to state in our appraisal assignments that we are in the midst of a pandemic, and we may not have the data yet on how it impacts it, but if we do, we need to state that in our reports. But in our market, appraisers are already seeing a resurgence of requests for appraisal updates, similar to after the 2008 financial crisis. Interest rates are at a record low of below 2.94%, which should continue to drive demand for appraisal assignments. We may see a decline in requests for condos and mid-range properties as the wealth gap increases, lack of job security, and tightening of loan requirements. Beginning in spring 2021, we should start to see the COVID-19 new normal, outcome of election, federal government teleworking guidelines, and updated buyers' preferences. In closing, the DC market appears to be somewhat insulated, and any impact of COVID-19 is expected to be short-lived.
Thank you so much, Ayako.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and go to Miami. Wendy Friedman, SRA Target Appraisal Group. Wendy, welcome. The floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Wendy Friedman. Good afternoon. I thought it was first necessary to look at the quantitative data from pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic. So pre-pandemic is between January 1st and March 15th. This was before the city was closed and locked down, and then pandemic was from March 15th to June 1st. Of course, the quantitative data does not tell the whole story, but we see that I broke it down into between condominiums and single family homes into 3 different range of values. We have the condominiums from $300 to $1 million. As you can see that the sales pre-pandemic were 651, and then it went down to 468, which was a 28% decline. The median sales price did dip 9%. It looks like the median days on market were pretty flat, no major changes, and the median sales to list price was pretty much stable as well. Then we get to the condominiums from the 1 million to 5 million. Again, we see a dip in overall sales pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. We also see a dip in the median sales price, which went down 7%. We also get to then the $5 million plus. We see that there really has been no change in the number of sales, and there was a slight increase, or sorry, can't see the slide. Again, so before the pandemic, we did have a oversupply of condominiums for sale, especially in the high-end range. So this really doesn't necessarily show that reflect. It doesn't really make sense that we think that especially the high end, that we wouldn't see those changes. But again, because the median times are much longer for higher end condominiums, then they would not be reflected in our current. We wouldn't see the sales prices in such a short amount of time. Okay, and next slide, please.
If you look at slide number 1.
Okay, we have the single family home quantitative data, and the 300 to 1 million. And again, we see a slight uptick. There were more homes, single family homes in that price range. Once we get to a little higher price, the 1 million to 5 million, we see a decrease of 9%. And then the median sales price, we also see a dip of 5%. Once we get to the high-end homes, we see a slight uptick in the number of sales, and we also see a slight uptick in the median sales price. Okay, next slide, please.
Analysis indicates rough.
So summary of this data is the high-end luxury market for both condominium and single-family homes shows stable with slight upticks. However, due to much longer marketing times, it's not possible to gauge the true effects. The middle market has 5 to 7% declines in both condominiums and single family homes. The lower condo market has seen most declines, 9%, and the single family market has been stable. Some of the supply issues that we've seen from COVID that have been important in this market is that there was a moratorium on open houses. Also, condominium buildings have prevented access for non-residents. That includes realtors, appraisers, home inspectors. So that definitely has been affecting the sales process. We also hear from realtors that buyers are taking their properties off market and waiting until the crisis passes. And also issues with the construction supply chain. Some of the factors that are really important in demands for Miami real estate, of course, there are buyers that want to move out of the crowded condominium buildings. They're looking for family homes. Buyers wanting to move from cities like New York to lower density Miami-Dade County. And then we also have many international buyers, which during other times have sort of picked up the slack. And when our economy was down, then their economy might be also good, but now they're suffering the same COVID crisis. Then, we're not getting the same kind of buyers that we would normally depend on. So that's it.
Thank you, Wendy. Let's go ahead and go to Philadelphia. John Simonera, SRA, with John Simonera and Company. John, welcome. Good afternoon. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you to Deborah, Jeff, Bill, Ray, and all the rest of you participants. A little bit in the way of background. I've been practicing real estate appraising in the Philadelphia market for 35 years or so. I'm going to identify the subject. The Philadelphia metropolitan market contains 11 counties, 5 in Pennsylvania, 5 in New Jersey, and 1 in the little but mighty state of Delaware. That's Newcastle County. Today's data source for this COVID impact on residential real estate has been gathered from Bright MLS and contains parts of a report that they prepared back in May of this past year. Each of the three slides contain graphs, one containing a year-over-year view and another containing a longer 10-year perspective on the market statistics. The numbers will tell the story. Okay, first slide. I'd like to draw your eyes over to the far right part of the metro market activity, the new listings, active listings, pending listings. Some things that jumped out at me was the new listings. The new listings year over year off 63%. The new pendings off 60%. It's a pretty big hit. Another thing that I looked at is that we're in the middle of a spring market, and this one chart does show March to April of this past year, and that's off almost 50%. In the middle of the biggest sale we have in real estate, we lost half of the shelves. So it's like bath tissue with the supermarket real estate. The lower chart, if you look at it, is new home sales, median price, and you can see that reflects a 6-year low in closed sales. So there's some negative things going on in inventory. Next chart, please.
John, if I could real quick, just try to talk a little louder into your mic. I was having a little trouble hearing.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
A little better, yes.
Okay. This chart here shows a breakdown of the metro market by county. All 11 of the counties are here. There's a range and drop off from new listings. Again, it's a new listing grid from 43% to 73%, and the total metro market down 63% in new listings. It's significant. The lower chart gives you the new listing trend for the past 10 years, and you can see it was fairly steady up until this year, and then it took that 63% drop off, which is the lowest in the past 10 years. The third chart, please. Okay, this chart breaks out by the metropolitan area by price point. And I thought it interesting to look at the under $299,000 price point. You can see to the far right the percentage of loss in activity there. It appears that the closed sales are evaporating in that under $300,000 market from 14.8 down to 55.6. It's significant, and that seems to be where most of the pain from COVID is being impacted. The over $300,000 price point, you can see, is very little change. The numbers are almost stagnant. And then to your right, you have, again, the monthly supply. And again, the trend is going down. It's all about inventory. I suppose if I had to sum up the effect on real estate from COVID in Philadelphia, the word would be supply or lack of supply. The final thought would be, due to COVID, it is reported that 1 in 4 Americans have applied for unemployment. How many people go back to work, and what will the impact be on purchasing power is my concern. This is definitely an impact from COVID, because there's no other economic issues going on in my market other than that has been affecting me. I hope all of you found this helpful. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, John. All right, let's go to Atlanta. Dan Fries, Daniel Fries Associates. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Hope everyone's doing well today. I have 3 slides, and this one is Fulton County, what we refer to inside the perimeter. So Atlanta has the perimeter that circles the business area, and then outside the perimeter is basically your suburbs. What this one shows, this is the largest section. So what we're looking at here is the green line represents the active listings. And I guess we're going to have a similar theme. The blue line is the median sales price. And as you can see, Atlanta tends to really set the woods on fire in the spring. Even though we don't have snow, etc., we really slow down in the fourth quarter and the first quarter. So the drop in listings is pretty typical as what you see from October, November, December, January. And then when you hit that February, March, normally it pops back up to where you would be, you know, in June, looking at this chart. So what we have here is this, when the shelter in place hit, it was time to list and nobody lists, or the listings are down. And the listings are approximately down about 25 to 30%, depending on your area. Not as severe as other areas, but they're less. And basically supply and demand, we've got fewer listings. The prices have pretty much stabilized and, if anything, gone up slightly. Okay, next slide. Okay, this slide is from a suburb, which is outside the perimeter, as the locals like to say, OTP. We even have little stickers on their cars that some people put, if I'm a ITP or OTP. Forsyth County is north. That's the Lake Lanier area. It's a pretty typical suburban environment. You'll see that the prices are pretty flat for the most part, trending up. The listings have dropped significantly. We do have, you know, with the lower inventory, we've got fewer transactions. Prices in the suburbs are pretty much stable, probably going to increase just due to the larger gap that we have there. Again, you're looking at about 30% fewer listings than if you would take it to a period this time. So I think we're going to be okay in the suburbs. I think we're going to be okay inside the perimeter on single family detached. Next slide. The next slide is, this slide is condo inside the perimeter. We have some high rises, mid rises, and this would include attached townhomes as well. The prices again are relatively okay. You know, they're hanging in there. A little bit of a drop in April and May, but not significant. I would point out though, a drop in price in the spring is not typical for Atlanta. So that's definitely an issue. The other issue here, as I put the canary in the coal mine here, is that the inventory has gone up significantly, or so, you know, 3 to 4 months versus 8 to 9. And a lot of it has to do, you just couldn't show the properties. If you're in a high rise, mid rise with elevators and doormen and all that, you just can't show your units. So we're just going to have to see what happens moving forward. Couple quick takeaways for the Metro Atlanta. You're going to see fewer sales, mostly stable prices for single family detached homes. I'm going to expect single family detached to have some segments do better than others. There will be winners and losers. I think the suburbs will continue to do well. There was a trend inside the perimeter, renovating in the urban areas. We'll just have to see if people run to the burbs to flee the density of the city, and time will tell. We've got low inventory, low interest rates. I think we're going to have stable residential home prices for now. Condominiums potentially could be less appealing. They've always suffered a little bit in the metro Atlanta area just due to the availability of land, and Atlanta's a spread out city. We have higher inventory levels due to the fact you couldn't show them. It's probably going to take a few months to have this shake out, and just see if the market wants to avoid the higher density for suburban housing. That's basically it. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
Up to Boston. Mercedes Calkins, SRA with Calkins Real Estate. Mercy, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. And thank you to everybody in the webinar for putting this on. Can you hear me okay?
Sound great.
Okay. Just in the spirit of being short and concise with an overview of Suffolk County only, this is Boston. I'm just going to go through the sales activity that was happening during COVID, and we had a first chart here explains that the past 4 months, January through April, we had an increase in the single family sales, went down 10.6%. But condos not only remained steady, they went up in sales activity because we have a lot of new developments in town that were very active during that time. So I was able to get most of the information from the banker and tradesmen. We're very lucky to have that service up here, which provides us with statistics and sales data from the Registry of Deeds. That comes out on a monthly basis, and everybody's able to subscribe to the service. You're able to get the numbers of sales and the median price ranges for all types of properties. But Boston has a very, very strong real estate market. It's right up there with San Francisco, New York City, Washington, D.C. We're very resilient. We have a strong market. Yes, there was a stall, and yes, there were some low activity during the month of April for sure, but we have bounced back. You'll see in the next slides. However, the next slide here, or rather the second chart, shows just for the month of April alone, that you see that there was a drop in sales activity, a drastic drop of 30%. So yes, it were affected. Buyers withdrew their listings, sellers stayed home. We just didn't have any activity during that time. And condos were also low in activity. So it was much a dramatic decrease in sales activity just for that month alone. As of May, it certainly picked up, and by mid-May, properties were going under agreement. I will say the banker and tradesman only goes to the next month for May, by June 15th, they will have their issue out for the month of May. So it's a little too early to say what the statistics were for May at this time, because that will not be published until June 15th. Okay, next slide. And here's some more activity in Boston. This shows the median sales price. As I said, we have a very strong market here. Median sales price from January through April for a single family was $560,000. For a condo, it was a lot higher at $672,000. All properties, including multifamilies, land, anything residential, was $680,000. And it's very competitive out there. It's very strong. There's more buyers than there is available housing in the city. We basically have to work with what we have. We don't have a lot of land. We have to do either rehab existing buildings, or we have to do tear downs of existing buildings to have the land to build on. Next one, and that was a change of the median sales price. And as you can see from the little chart above it, gave the prices, and this gives you the percentage of any changes from that period of the past 4 months.
Streamlining the current process.
During this time, they inched up a little, but condo, there was a stronger increase in value for condominiums because, again, we have a lot of development in town Boston with high rises along the seaport area, and a lot of that had to be absorbed. The next slide. And here is the median sales price just in April alone for singles and condos. For April, you had, even though there was a lack of sales activity, the sales that go on were strong. There was an uptick in the values at 7.14%. Very little inventory up here, and there's more buyers. The condo percentage change was even higher because we have a lot of condos in Boston proper. That was at 9.4%. As increase in median sales price for both single families and condos for April, even during the COVID time. And viewing all of Suffolk County, again, that's Boston, includes the neighborhoods of Allston, Back Bay, Bay Village, Beacon Hill, Brighton, Charlestown, Dorchester, downtown Boston, East Boston, Fenway, Hyde Park, Pico Plain, Mattapan, Mission Hill, North End, Roslindale, South Boston, South End, West End, West Roxbury. So it's a pretty big area. Next slide. So this is just my quick overview of the Boston market from what I've last couple months. COVID-19 pandemic became a reality in March, and the Metro Boston real estate market stalled for 2+ months. Sellers and buyers both withdrew from the market. Sales activity declined. However, pricing stabilized, if not increased, which I showed you in the charts. Then unprecedented government intervention initiated. Dramatic growth programs money into the economy and restored buyer and seller confidence in the market. We had a couple programs there with the paycheck program, additional $600 a week for unemployment compensation and forbearance programs. But we certainly didn't see a lot of foreclosures in this area. Confidence in the market was restored and inventory was stabilized. Both buyers and sellers are ready to deal. Currently, there's a pent-up demand leading to a minimum supply, very low supply, and rapid sales activity as of June 2020. We're experiencing increasing values or rising sales prices. With respect to the residential rental market, demand has stabilized somewhat, and in some areas it has softened. There are some decreases in the rental rates because we have for students that haven't returned, and maybe in the fall, the graduate students will be taking their courses online, or international students won't be here. So there's a little softening in the rental market. Rental units are on the market a little longer, and there was a slight uptick in overall. So that's just a quick overview of the Suffolk County area, which is Boston. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Mercy. To all of our panelists, just make sure that you muted yourself if you're not talking. We are hearing a faint voice or some kind of programming in the background. Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on from our MSA discussions and talk a little bit about some of the various issues and particular specialty areas of residential appraisal, starting first with Warren Boisot, SRA, with BLG Appraisal Group, talking about the appraisal flexibility programs in the FHA, VA, and GSE space. Warren, thanks for joining us.
You bet, Bill. Thank you, and thanks everybody for joining. Hello from sunny Denver. Apparently, we did not make the cut in the top 10. We'll work on that for next year. But I am here to talk to you about the appraisal flexibilities. I think I was probably the most annoying panelist because I waited as long as I could to get in my final information because it is so ever changing. So I will tell everyone that what I tell you now may change in an hour. I had mine uploaded, and 5 minutes later yesterday I got the new direction from Fannie Mae that things had changed. So I think that's part of the problem in this pandemic, is that there's a bit too much information and it's coming from many different sources. I know if you're like me, you're probably getting inundated with emails from your lenders, the VA, the FHA, here, this is what's changing, this is what's changing. So it is quite hard to keep up with. I looked just alone with the VA, when they make changes in things, they come out with what they call circulars. I counted 27 different circulars just since the pandemic started. So that is challenging. And what's more challenging is that in different markets, there's different rules. It depends whether you're in shelter in place, safer at home. What is your market doing? For example, here in Denver, it was lifted on May 8th. So I'm pretty much a month into being kind of business as usual. But that's not the case in somewhere like LA or Alaska, where it's totally clear. So the problem too, some lenders and banks, your clients, are simply not accepting an exterior only appraisal. At that point, it kind of becomes a business decision to you. Are you comfortable? Are you even comfortable yourself going in the house? That's a choice that many appraisers have to make, that whether you even want to approach going into a home. If you do choose to go in the home, these are things that many of us have heard many times over, but worth repeating. If any of the points of contact, the homeowner, the tenant, the realtor that's meeting you are displaying any symptoms, do not proceed with the inspection. If any of the parties have been around anybody with COVID-19, do not proceed with the inspection. If entering a home, obviously we're practicing social distancing protocols, staying 6 feet away from the homeowner or tenant, wear your masks, your booties, your gloves. It just gives a good peace of mind to the homeowner. And don't imagine for a second that they're probably not being interviewed by their lender later on. Hey, when the appraiser was in the house, did they wear masks? That kind of thing. So keep that in mind. Anecdotally, I had one homeowner that I was supposed to go to a home where the tenant was there, and they said, no, you know, they're having a little bit of a fever. Are you okay with going in? Are you still okay with going in the house? I said, absolutely not. So again, it's up to your own comfort level. As far as I could tell from doing my research, everyone in the country, regardless of market, was considered essential, which is good for us. Next slide, please. Specifically with the VA, which is what I do primarily is VA work. As of March 27th, there was a circular that came out that basically stated, and this was kind of forefront in the industry. The VA kind of made the first move towards this, that any occupied home, no matter the purpose of the appraisal, whether it be refi, purchase, liquidation, our appraiser will not enter the home if they're in a shelter-in-place or mandated quarantine situation. Forget it. You're not going inside. That made some challenges, but vacant homes, we're still requiring an interior inspection in the purchase scenario. So you got a vacant house, brand new construction, you know, that's kind of a different situation. But bottom line, homeowner there, do not go in. The thing with VA that's a little different than others was the Fannie Mae 2055 form is allowed, 2075 for condos. Exterior only must be noted in the ever important map reference field at the top of page 1 with the following statement, boldly added, per Department of Veterans Affairs, no interior inspection was provided due to COVID-19. Got to have that on every report, in bold, easy to see. Again, anecdotally, I had a situation where after we lifted our shelter in place in my market, of the handfuls of enhanced exterior appraisals that I did, the 2 lenders came back and said, we won't accept it. One important thing to know with VA work, the VA can request an interior inspection on one that was done during the COVID pandemic, but the lender cannot. Now, whether we turn that into a new assignment, that's a whole other thing. You guys are familiar with USPAP and how to adhere to it, but keep in mind that the lender cannot just require you to go back out just because they didn't like the exterior appraisal. Moving on to FHA, next slide, please. They came out, the mortgage letter on 2020-05, that basically allowed the desktop and exterior only inspections. That changed, and again, that's what came out yesterday too, is July 31st now, that has been extended. Difference between FHA and VA, they will not allow the 2055 form. We still must use the 1004 and 1073. And appraisals are to be completed as is unless your MPRs, minimum property requirements, any MPR related deficiencies are observed from the street or known to the appraiser for any reason. In the case where shelter in place has been lifted, the FHA still recommends that prior to inspection, the appraiser instructs the homeowners to have areas around the crawl space, maybe a ladder be set up for the attic to make it where just contact is less on all fronts between you and the homeowner. And FHA also extended the foreclosure and an eviction moratorium, halting new foreclosure actions. They suspended most foreclosure actions in process and ceased evictions from FHA insured single family properties. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks so much, Warren. You know, as I was looking at this slide, I think as we were doing the lead up to this, the FHA guidelines, or the program change that was made, was actually relevant to the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac pensions on July 31. And I think that's one issue that we just want to clarify, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. And in that case, because that's what I was looking for too, just couldn't find for sure clarification. FHA in that case still has been extended to the June 30th of 2020 rather than July 31st. Again, that's for FHA.
There you go. Yeah, thank you very much. And that was actually on my end for some of the confusion. So appreciate you clarifying that. Let's go ahead and move on to the next speaker, and employee relocation, Byron Miller, SRA, AIRRS. Byron, what are you seeing in employee relocation programs right now?
Thank you, Bill. Well, before I start talking about relocation, all right, I would like to talk about, before I start talking about national trends, I'd like to touch on my local market. In the Minneapolis-St. Paul, Minnesota, 7-county metro area, the COVID pandemic gained prominence on March 8th, 2020. As a result, we have about 3 months of data to look at the impact of the pandemic on the metro area. And to get a flavor of how the pandemic has affected the national real market, I surveyed 5 of the relocation clients in the country to tease out commonalities. So let's look at this active listings to begin with. This is in my metro area. If you look at this, these are active listings. And the active listings from year to year, from May 2019 up to May 2019 to 2020, the active listings were down 25.4%. If you could advance the slide for me, Bill, please. And looking at the closed listings from the same area, looking at the right-hand side, you will see that there's a decrease of 19.4%. Now, if you could advance the next slide for me, please. So I spoke with 5 of the largest relocation clients in the industry to tease out issues and concerns. So the first one has to do with assignment volume. And what I found was volume was down 10 to 50% over the same time last year. On average, it seemed to be down about 20%. Factors included transferring reluctance, companies restricting travel, and anecdotally, clients indicated that East and West coasts were more significantly impacted than the Midwest, possibly due to greater governmental restrictions and a confusion to those deemed essential services. The outlook for volume going forward, they appear to be optimistic, and they talk much about being a busy rest of the year and having the normal spring season shifted to the summer with pent-up demand with the easing of the governmental restrictions. With regards to challenges, the major challenge had to do with appraiser availability and turn times. It's that age-old argument. 3 factors emerged. One had to do with the pool of appraisers, low mortgage interest rates, and how to do inspections. The first one with the pool of appraisers. Many appraisers stop appraising initially, and some are slow to come back. So there's a shortage of appraisers because, as we all are aware of, the COVID loves folks in the appraiser average age group. The second one has to do with low mortgage interest rates. The market for starter and mid-level homes is very brisk right now. And that has to do with low interest rates. So that is siphoning off. That's siphoning off the availability of appraisers to do mortgage work. To do relocation work. I apologize. I'm getting some ringing here, and it's distracting me. The third has to do with inspections and getting the inspections done. Many relocation companies have tried to think outside the box, adopting practices from other industries, such as virtual inspections. On average, there's about 2% inspections were done virtually, where a definition of virtually had to do with doing a drive-by external with some type of virtual interior. From that, many clients were indicating a frustration where many relocation appraisers are out 2 to 4 weeks for an inspection.
We're getting some terrible feedback on here. Bill?
Yeah. Byron, go ahead and just wrap up if you can, and we're at our time too.
Yep. Okay, opportunities have to do with workflow, on how they're doing that, on how they're getting workflow done, and process overhaul. As some of the other panelists had mentioned previously, there's really not enough data to determine whether or not this decrease is the new normal or a blip. And as a great philosopher, Heraclitus said, the only constant in life is change. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thanks, Byron. Thanks for working through those technical issues. Make sure you mute yourself as you go into the queue. And onto our last speaker, and looking at some of the rural issues, Michael Tankersley, MAI, SRA, AI, GRS, AI, RRS with Tankersley Appraisal. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Bill. If you look at the map, you can see my primary service area, which covers the rural counties of southern Middle Tennessee. Most of these counties have not seen a significant number of COVID-19 cases. However, there is one exception. I chose Bedford County as my case study because they had an outbreak in a Tyson poultry plant at the beginning of April. And I started my analysis by examining the sales trends from the local MLS to determine if the recent safer at home restrictions in Tennessee had had an effect on the market. And I found that median sale prices were level over the last few months, but were still significantly higher than last year. The number of sales slightly decreased over the last 3 months, but were also higher than last year. And this data indicates that transactions were still closing despite the social distancing guidelines and limitations, and very few buyers were walking away from contracts. Pending sales actually increased during the last few months, and there was a spike in new contracts during May. Next slide, please. The only negative indicator, which was very small, was days on the market. However, that trend had started in 2019 and had only increased slightly. Listing activity, which is always a good indicator of changing market conditions, was examined, and new listings had decreased recently, but are still higher than last year. The number of homes for sale have been level, but is also higher than last year. Typically, listings increase when households are under financial strain or if the economy is struggling. However, in this case, it's just an active market. Another good place to look for market changes is in new house construction. Most of the major national firms are not active in the rural counties that I work. So most of the subdivisions are developed by local builders, and they tend to build less than 20 houses at a time. Our local builders and lenders learned some hard lessons during the last recession, and both are very cautious about getting overextended on larger projects. However, during the last few months, construction has continued, and list prices and sale prices are stable. And I've not seen an increase in any buyer incentives. Next slide, please. We may see some changes in buyer preferences going forward. The pandemic has increased the desire for many people to seek self-reliance and less confined living spaces. Local realtors have seen an increase in demand for homes with bigger yards and an increase in demand for hobby farms. Many purchasers want the bigger yards for their children, space for gardens, and space for a few animals. As demand for rural homes increases, one key will be access to high-speed internet and reliable cellular service. Many office workers that have been working remotely will continue to be there in the future. These changes in buyer preferences are very similar to those that Mr. Wagner talked about in his report from Chicago, and I think that we're going to see that probably nationwide. Employment will be one of the driving forces in our local economy over the next few months. The chart shows how unemployment has spiked during the safer at home restrictions. Many businesses and industries are beginning to reopen. While the housing data shows that these rural markets have not been significantly affected yet, that could change rapidly if employers cannot reopen fully because of limited consumer demand, or if they decide to pare down their workforce for more efficient operations. Our colleagues out west are worried about the issues affecting the agricultural markets. With many crops and livestock not making it to market, their local economies are being hit harder than those in my area. So here's the big question. Why are these numbers positive and unaffected by the crisis? The infection rates are low and very few people know anyone who's been sick. Most rural residents think the pandemic affects only those living in big cities and our older citizens. They've just continued on with their lives. Unfortunately, we've seen that this pandemic devastated some rural communities throughout the country when it was least expected. Over the past week, Tennessee's new COVID-19 cases reached levels not seen since early May. This could be a result of increased testing. However, hospitalization numbers have also increased. The pandemic still poses tremendous market risk and health risks to both homeowners and appraisers. So let's continue to do everything we can to reduce those risks. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks so much, Mike. President Sherman, some concluding thoughts.
Thanks, Bill. Hey, Bill, let me just ask a quick question of you before I say a couple things here. Are we making this whole seminar available online, and or are the PDF copies of the slides available separately?
Yeah, I believe the slides are part of the registration, and you can download them there at within the registration link that all attendees receive. And we will be posting this to our social media channel, I believe the YouTube channel, where we have posted previous free webinars before.
Great, that's very helpful information. Thanks so much, Bill. You know, I think we do face a lot of uncertainties. This is the craziest medical and economic situation I think any of us have been in. There have been some severe things that we've seen before, you know, and I've been in the business for 36 years, so you can go back through the RTC, you can talk about disasters, you can talk about the dot-com bubble crisis, 9/11, onward and onward. But I know that in these downturns, our high-quality services have always been needed, as well as they are now more than ever. So our job really is to untangle the web of uncertainty for our clients. And we can do this because we're trained to the highest level. We do have the best education and a tremendous bank of experience from which to draw our conclusions. And today's seminar provides a lot of different clues about how a lot of different experts are analyzing their market and looking at it. So I think what we did today is very helpful. I hope you can leverage that into the future. And don't forget to leverage your colleagues and talk with them about what they're doing, what they're seeing. I think that also will be a great benefit to you. Next slide, please. So I'm making a little announcement here that we are going to have an October premiere of a brand new 7-hour seminar being written by Mark Ratterman. I know a lot of you know Mark from Indiana. Mark has done so many books for us, written so many books and so many seminars and classes, an outstanding expert. The focus of this is the title is Rapid Response Market Analysis. So he'll be focusing on a variety of things. And if I could go to the next slide, please. So there are 6 slides from here back. I'm not going to go through these bullet points. I'm going to, they're indicative of what you will be able to see in the seminar. I think they'll help lend definition about best practices for you, while also providing some real world and real-time solutions for you in today's most unusual conditions. And if you can go to the last slide for me, we're kind of skipping a bunch of these. So I want you to make sure you read these because there's a lot of good stuff in here, but I think you can get it on your own. So if you'd skip down to the end, that would be great. Okay. Yeah, I think one more, perhaps. Back up just one. So again, just on behalf of the Appraisal Institute and the entire profession, I'd like to thank all of our participants, especially for today's seminar and donating their time and expertise. And for the attendees, we have somewhere in the vicinity of 800 people attending this webinar today. And so I think the takeaway is we have some new thoughts, new ways of doing things, make our work product better. High quality is extremely important, and all of this is being done for the betterment of the profession. Bill, thanks. It's your show. Thanks again to the participants.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. And remember, you can submit a question to us using the questions tab. We do have a number of questions, and we have about 30 minutes remaining in today's program. So let's go ahead and kick this off with some of the responses from attendees. First one with Dominic. Since COVID-19, we here in the New Jersey suburbs have seen an uptick in luxury residential home sale contracts. However, there is a low inventory. The result appears to be increased market values. Are you seeing an increase in sales inventory in the New York City boroughs?
We're really not seeing anything consistent. There's been very low volume of sales. Listings have been pulled off the market. Everyone is still running scared. Don't forget, just like in Jersey, but obviously different than in places like Tennessee, everyone I talk to, literally everyone I talk to, either knows someone who had the virus or knows someone who died from the virus. So we're not seeing any uptick in especially in high-end sales at all.
All right, thank you for that. And someone asked about the projected or potential bankruptcy in the city and whether that might, what kind of effect that might have.
The city of New York bankrupt?
That's what they indicate. Well, there's some discussion about, and I don't think it's alone. I don't think New York's alone. There's been discussion of municipal bankruptcies and what kind of effect.
Well, obviously, if there's a bankruptcy, everything changes. But New York was on the very verge of bankruptcy back in the 70s, and with good leadership and stringent restrictions on all kinds of expenses, it pulled out of it and rebounded. Also, there's so many cities that are just in perilous shape, similar to New York. I don't think the federal government can let any of the major cities or any cities at all become bankrupt. I just don't see that's a reality.
Thank you for that. Did anybody want to jump in on that point? Okay, I do have a question for the whole panel. Given the resulting popularity of working from home, do you anticipate or are you seeing an increase in conversion of office space to residential spaces in your metro areas? Does anybody want to weigh in on that?
Bill, it's Charles. I think this trend has been ongoing for some time as office space becomes obsolete, especially older properties are seeing those being renovated and repurposed to residential, mid-rise, high-rise, downtown Los Angeles in particular. But with COVID, we might see that trend come to a pause as people reevaluate living in dense inner city urban environments. That's my take.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Repeat that question again, please.
So, given the resulting popularity of working from home, do you anticipate or are you seeing an increase in conversion of office space to residential spaces in your metro areas?
Okay. In New York City, that's kind of been the trend for many years. I think it's just going to be ongoing, but don't forget, in New York City, I think it's very different than a lot of other areas in that people's living spaces are smaller, less square footage than in a lot of other areas of the country. So yes, it's efficient for employers to have their employees work from home at least a few days a week, and efficient for the employees, but there's physically a limited amount of space, and a lot of people, especially if they live in a small co-op or a small condo, it can be difficult. So I think just the trend in New York is just going to continue along that same route. I don't know that this will accelerate it necessarily, but I think it will accelerate having less people commute, and that's what we're hoping for.
This is Chip Wagner speaking. I'm seeing kind of similar things as Dom is in New York. We're seeing a similar thing in Chicago. Several relocation directors working for large real estate firms here in Chicago have seen definitely an influx or an outflux from smaller spaces where multiple people working out of the same house, they need more space. So the smaller housing spaces we think are going to be tougher down the road, but specifically the commercial or office to residential, which what the question was, I don't that again is a trend that we've seen over time here as well. I'm not sure if it's gonna change significantly as a result. I think there's more people looking for more space and moving out of the city right now.
More space in their homes, Chip?
Looking for homes with more space.
Right. Okay. So they can work comfortably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, any other thoughts on that conversion question?
This is Byron. I thought I'd try the echo again, see if the echo's gone.
Oh, that sounds so much better, Byron. Thank you.
All right. I don't know what's happening before. I was muted the whole time. With regards locally, talking to clients, homeowners, family, friends, extended folks that I know, there's a big push for many, many people saying that their companies are not going to have them go back to work until the fall at the earliest, and that there's a lot of discussion about transitioning to a vast majority of folks that can work from home to continue to work from home.
Thank you for that. We received.
This is Mercedes. In Boston, we're seeing it too as a large urban area here. The trend has been happening for years to do either half at home, half in the city. But it's a little too early to tell how the city, when it goes through phase 2 and phase 3, how they're going to open up the city, because it's still very, very quiet in Boston, and it'll be new normal might be working more days at your home office. So yes, I think there's going to be a need definitely a home office, whether that's a bedroom or you take a room in the third floor, but you're seeing a majority of the workers from downtown Boston working at home now.
Thank you, Mercy. We received a question about the civil unrest in the market today and whether that may play a role in the market now or in the future. We'll go ahead and turn to Byron on that, since he's right in Minneapolis where this started. Byron, can you unpack that issue at all? What are you seeing in the local market?
I can give you my opinion, which is just my observations on it, seeing that I am literally a mile and a half as the crows flies from where Mr. Floyd lost his life, and a mile and a half from where they burned my post office with my mail in it and destroyed my bank. You could see the flames off in the distance from my home. Well, with regards to, we have many issues in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and having to do with our livability and our current city council. We have a change in zoning, which has caused an uproar. Our city has been advocating for higher density. I think with a combination of COVID as well as the the unrest that's been happening here, I think it's still too early to tell. We're data analysts, so we really don't have any data to support that. But when I'm driving around and I'm looking at the burned out buildings along a major business nodes and whatnot, I see a lot of people nervous. So I really wouldn't be surprised if I'm seeing a huge later on exodus from the city.
Thank you for those observations. Anybody else want to weigh in on the question?
Yes, this is Ayako from DC. I think that it may have an impact, and I think it's going to look exactly what we see, what the protesters, the age range that they are, that the younger are going to feel more comfortable living in and around the city, but maybe the older population is going to want to move out, so they're not coming in close contact with that civil unrest.
Thank you, Ayako. Let's see, we have a question about real estate taxes. What are people's observations? Are property owners in markets or in all markets paying real estate taxes today?
This is Chip Wagner in Chicago. I'll tackle that just a little bit. High real estate taxes definitely hurt property values. The state of Illinois is very heavily taxed, and if corporations continue to move their office spaces into homes, there's going to be fewer corporate America paying taxes into our system, which will continue to push property taxes up in our state. I'm pretty concerned because we've lost quite a bit of population over the last 10 years or so, and we've watched our property taxes continue to increase. So high property taxes affects affordability and people are able to buy homes, and I think that's going to be a serious problem in the state of Illinois moving forward.
Thanks, Chip. Any other comment on that question?
I might add, this is Dan in Atlanta. Some of the outside perimeter counties have school tax. Once you hit 65, you don't have to pay the school tax. So their taxes are almost 50% of what it is in the city. And so, I mean, it definitely impacts, which is why the Forsyth County one I used as an example is, people retire and they move outside the perimeter and cut their taxes in half and get a bigger house. So that's kind of happening here.
Thank you, Dan. Question for Alan Gardner. Or before we come to that, was there another comment?
Yeah, this is Dominic from New York again. We have, I don't know if it's unique. I'm curious to know if any other of you in the largest cities also have the same thing. We have what's called the mansion tax. So if someone spends $1 million on a residential property in New York City, they pay an extra transfer tax, and it's graduated. It's 0.01%, and then it graduates up to, I think, over 0.2% the more expensive the property is. And that's led many people to sell a house or apartment that's worth $1 million for $999,999. You give them $1 at closing. But what it's done is it's brought down the prices of the extreme high end because people just don't want to pay such a high mansion tax. So I'm wondering, does that exist in other parts of the country?
Yes, it does. This is Mercedes Calkins. We have it in Cambridge. We have it happening in, it's been talked about quite a bit in Boston. It hasn't been implemented yet, but in some of the affluent suburbs around Boston, they want to implement the transfer tax. I believe that's a 2.5% tax on the sale, and that's supposed to be earmarked for affordable housing. It hasn't been put in place quite yet. Cambridge is on the forefront, and the other cities are following suit. But it's on the horizon. It's coming.
Interesting.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you're going to probably see that sort of thing happening in urban centers because they are certainly going to need some revenue.
Bill, Charles.
Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
Okay. California, we have, of course, Prop 13, which fixes property taxes at market value at the time of transfer, with increases limited to 1.2% a year. There is talk of a split roll here in California that would reassess commercial properties periodically and reset those taxes to market rates. And the impetus for that may increase going forward as the state is facing a deficit. There are transfer taxes here in California at the state level, as well as some cities assess a transfer tax, but there's no scaled transfer tax based upon, there's nothing that kicks in at $1 million or 10 and up, at least at this point in time. Thank you.
Bill,
Mercedes Hawkins again. I just wanted to mention that you also have to look at sometimes the assessing of the properties because some of the assessors have been using yearly appreciation compounded on the past appreciation on the past year. And so you're getting some higher assessed values on the properties, more so than the actual the value or the sales price. So we're starting to see that where before it used to be traditionally the assessment would be lower or sometimes closer to it, but now the assessed values are higher.
Thank you. And was there one other comment?
Yeah, Bill, this is Mark Verrett in Houston. I just an observation that a lot of the questions here are surrounding topics that kind of all lead to one thing. In Houston, we've been really successfully leading a reurbanization, government subsidy and that sort of thing to increase density in Houston and bring people into the city. And whether it be the prevalence of COVID in higher density areas, civil unrest, high real estate taxes, the awakening to work at home, all of these things are almost entirely 2020 phenomenon that are happening here that maybe on the beginning of a shift, at least in our city, of reurbanization back out a little more. So it's just something I'm observing through all the dramatic changes this year.
No, that's actually one of my next question, or one of the next questions of attendees is how do we expect intensifying outmigration, and how intense do we expect that to suburban and rural areas? To your point, Mark.
Bill, I might add that this is Alan Gardner in the Dallas area. I might add that the two home builders that said that we're going to have record sales are both in further out suburban markets, and one of the things they attribute to is the fact that they had a lot of people wanting to move from urban to suburban areas.
Yeah, as I was saying in my presentation on Houston, it's too early to observe the out migration, those living inside the city to the suburban areas. But anecdotally, it is obvious to market participants here that those looking to buy are choosing suburban where they might not have chosen suburban before. One last statistic that may be that kind of canary in a coal mine in Houston is that townhome and condo sales were down 36% year over year in the month of May. So, I suspect that people are considering their options, and that will only intensify here.
Mercedes Calkins in Boston. I would say that the millennials and the young people truly like living in a very diverse urban location. I can't see that changing anytime soon. It's we have our established neighborhoods here in the area, and of course we have so many universities. And there was some talk about over the past couple months of people migrating out. I don't see that happening because they still want convenience and they still want to be in an urban setting. So I don't think it's going to change too much here.
Mercedes, this is Dominic in New York again. I agree with that perspective as far as New York City. We saw in Manhattan that Manhattan had some of the lowest rates of COVID-19. And to a large degree because people just left. They went to their second homes or went to vacation homes or went to parents. But projecting a year from now or a year and a half from now, yes, there may be some fear-motivated flight out of New York City in general. But I think when there's a vaccine for this and this is all calmed down in a year or 2 years, that even those people that leave, it's going to be a small proportion of the total population of New York, and there'll be demand back again, and the younger people and millennials love to live here, and they'll fill the vacancies made by people that want to leave the city. I agree with you.
Yep, I agree.
This is Mike Tankersley. I agree 100%. One of the biggest problems with people moving from the cities back into the smaller towns in our area has been the lack of services, the lack of good grocery stores, the lack of good restaurants, things like that. When you have to drive 45 minutes to get somewhere to go to a nice restaurant or to find a good retail, it does get to be very difficult. And so most of the people who actually have the money to live in the more metropolitan areas of Nashville choose to do that, even though they work in our areas. What I do think may happen, though, is we are seeing a migration coming south from the metropolitan area and into those rural areas. So some of your higher wealth individuals may choose to actually stay at what now may be their weekend homes and stay longer there. But that's all going to depend on, can you get good cell service, can you get high-speed internet, and can you work from that location? Because there is a draw to that slower paced living, but I agree 100%. I don't think it's going to be the young people who are starting their careers. I think it's going to be somebody looking for that self-sufficiency.
All right, thanks for those comments. Question for Alan Gardner on how those charts were prepared.
Those charts that I had, they were basically taken. Yeah, they were basically taken from Netris multiple listing service, the data, and I just prepared them through Excel. So it's Netris, our local MLS systems data.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. One question I had was, and I've heard this from appraisers dealing with the appraisal flexibilities, and I have heard some concerns about the continuation of interior inspection assignment requests in areas where there are health concerns and hotspots, where there are flexibilities allowed for desktop and for drive-by appraisals. A lot of the users are continuing to require a interior and exterior inspection, even in some of these localities. Is that a concern, or what are people seeing and hearing from a practitioner standpoint on that point?
Well, that was my topic. This is Warren. I'll catch it real quick. I really think, as I mentioned in my presentation, it's a bit of a business decision. I do know appraisers that just simply, regardless of shelter in place or not, just will not go inside homes until they get some clarification on numbers going down, seeing the trends in their area stop going up, of vaccine maybe being developed. But I have both sides, friends on both sides. Some say they simply will not go in the house regardless of shelter in place, and I have others that say, look, if I have a mask on, gloves, I use my sanitizer, I'll be okay. And telling the homeowner ahead of time to open doors for you, turn on lights. That way you're just literally not touching anything. I think it literally is a comfort level thing.
Bill, this is John Simonera. I can only tell you my experience. I followed the state's guidelines. When we were not allowing interiors, I just didn't do it. Had a couple lenders that I had to say goodbye to. And then when they lifted it, what I've been doing is when I make the appointment, I ask them to open all the doors, turn all the lights on, and leave the house. And then I'll go in and won't touch anything and complete my inspection. And that so far has been working for me, and nobody's complained. So that's my 2 cents on that.
This is Mark Verrett in Houston, and we have offices in about 7 markets, and there was a time where the majority of orders being placed, it was a short period, were not requiring interior inspection. That generally seemed to lift when borrowers or homeowners express concern. We share that with the client. Usually at that point, the client is flexible, but not on the initial engagement. And it's worth noting that the average age of the appraiser, there's a concern for the appraiser being at high risk because the average age of the appraiser is in that high risk. There are considerations there, but the last observation that I think is really interesting and may prepare us for the next phase of whatever the appraisal process is we're finding, when we do a desktop appraisal as opposed to an interior, we find that now homeowners are very responsive to emails and texts requesting information about their homes, the interiors, things that wouldn't be available through public sources. I think that's been a very positive outcome from this over the last 4 months.
Mercedes Calkins here, and I wanted to say that about 75% of clients, when they going back in March, they had already sent out memos and requests for the desktop or drive-bys. But I consider the drive-by as an exterior, and I prefer that much more over than a desktop, because particularly multifamilies, you have no idea what the multifamily looks like from the exterior, let alone the street, the block it's on. There's just so many multifamilies in the city, and it can be very challenging to try to even get interior photos from the owners or from the tenants in these multifamilies. So you do the best you can. New construction, vacant apartments, I have no problem going in. They let us go in if it's vacant. But for the most part, I like to do exteriors because I like to see the location in the building.
Thank you, Mercedes. Okay, I got a question here from Cincinnati. Is anybody studying absorption rates of residential subdivision lots? I recall in Cincinnati that the first signs of a slowdown in the residential market were found in the sales of new homes and lots, causing a surplus of residential lots.
I can address that a little bit. I do residential new construction, and you're going to see the lot absorption slow down. So right now, at least in Georgia or in my area in the suburbs, there's not an oversupply, but we definitely have raw land. And so, I mean, it doesn't take a Rhodes Scholar to figure out if, D.R. Horton was knocking out 50 units a quarter, and now they're down to 25, that should impact the lot values. And that may help keep the prices from going up. But yes, I think it will be impacted. It's too early to tell. I just did a development where some out-of-state builder was coming to Georgia and getting ready to spend $30 million on a bunch of land and trying to overpay. So, it's definitely something to be aware of.
Thank you, Dan. Let's see. So PPP, stimulus money. Do we see that impacting the residential market at all?
I think it stabilized it.
Any other thoughts?
I think all those programs helped to stabilize, so we didn't have a real influx of stressed properties and foreclosures. I think it helped to give some owners some time.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, Bill, it's Charles. I think all of the money flowing in has just sort of hit the pause button on what inevitably is going to be a washing out of all of the vectors here that are at work with the forbearances and the moratoriums on evictions and all of this stuff. Once all this stuff sort of progresses forward to its conclusion, of course, the stimulus money is going to slow down, dry up. We're going to see some ramifications going forward, 6 to 10 months down the road. Thank you.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, question for Charles Baker. How do you explain the possible loss of 79% of affordable housing? Is this LA metro area or something else?
Well, let me go to that article specifically. It was a story. I'm sorry, just give me 1 second here. If I can find it, it's not the loss of it. It's just the financial stress of that housing, because what you have is homeowner or property owners and landlords that are depending upon federal and state, Section 8 tenancy. I did some work earlier this year where a number of the units were halfway houses, and those are being supported by state drug rehab programs. So if you have a moratorium on rent payments, these landlords are going to be stuck having to continue to maintain and maintain their buildings and service their underlying debt, but they're not going to have as much income coming in. So that's really where the stresses are. And so this is a call to action by the California Housing Partnership to get some money to help these homeowners. And I'm sorry, I don't have this on the tip of my tongue. I'm just reading this article here right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. So we've got 3:01 on the button here. Let's try to do 2 more questions if we can. We're going to call it a day. In your daily work, how important do you believe it is to monitor coronavirus statistical trends, such as total cases, total number of new cases, deaths, hospitalizations? Do you report this data in your appraisal reports? How well correlated or uncorrelated do you believe these statistics are to residential real estate values? Anybody want to take a crack at that?
Hey, Bill, this is Alan in the Dallas market. Quite honestly, we were trying to track it early on, but we really couldn't find any correlation. I think a lot of it kind of develops the fear. But at least for this market, I think there was some pent-up demand that actually just kind of threw those fears away. In Texas right now, you're already starting to see the cases rise again, which is going to be interesting because we've been opening up for a while. So it'll be interesting to see if the cases rising squelch the activity that we've seen over the last 3 to 4 weeks, or if it continues. But I think if anything, you watch it for the simple fact that there's a lot of people said here that the market literally changes every week.
Hi, this is Miyako in DC. I'm not stating the actual numbers in my report, but I have been taking a look at it because the new statistics are showing it divided by ward, and it's higher in other wards compared to others in DC. So I am kind of paying attention to it to see, is there going to be an impact on value because of that?
Thank you, Ayako. And final questions around new construction. Do we see a rise in new construction activity and pricing? It appears that buyers are focusing on new construction as it is, quote unquote, easier to buy given inventory issues. Any thoughts on that, if there aren't?
Well, I do a lot of new construction and resale, but I don't think there's any direct correlation that I personally see that the market has shifted that way. I think people like new construction for obvious reasons. It's new, and in our area, there is readily available. A lot of headaches involved with it, picking stuff out, dealing with we do not have the inventory of where you go there and they're already built, ready to go. So you're all of a sudden in the middle of this, it's framed and you're having to deal with it. And then you don't know exactly when it's going to close. So it makes it kind of harder sometimes to transition out of your existing home into the new home. I think if there's inventory, people probably prefer it, but I think a lot of people don't want to deal with the headache. But it's out there, but I don't think it's significant one way or the other. It's like chocolate and vanilla. It's just what you prefer.
It's in Houston, it's just 1 month of data, but it is interesting that sales volume in single family in total May over May from 19 to 20 was down 20%, but up 25% in new construction. It's just 1 month, but I didn't see any observable concerns with limited inventory or anything like that. So that's the feedback I have in Houston.
Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to pull rank and ask one more question. I didn't hear a lot of discussion about foreclosure or foreclosure activity or concern about foreclosures. Is it just too early at this point, or what are we thinking about relative?
So yeah, Charles, I think we're all concerned about it. I just don't know if we have enough data to measure the activity yet. I just don't think that foreclosures. First of all, there's been a moratorium on for homeowners. Once that moratorium expires, and especially for people who are renting their properties, then we might see an uptick in foreclosures. Also, the short term, the Airbnb market has really been hampered. A lot of folks that were buying properties and then leasing them out to short-term tenants, that market's really been hammered hard. So we might see some stresses there initially and then spreading. But again, concern, yes, there's not enough activity to really formulate an opinion yet. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone for joining today's webinar on the valuation impacts of COVID-19 1 to 4 unit residential. Thank you for your time. And thanks to all of our speakers for their time and expertise. We hope to see you soon on our next Appraisal Institute webinar. Have a great weekend and stay safe.
Thank you.